Sometimes a person can spend years walking down the same road, not because they love the direction it's taking them, but because it's familiar. They wake up each morning, go through the same motions, and repeat the same conversations, like the script of a play they didn't even write but somehow got cast in. Life becomes mechanical. Purpose gets replaced with obligation, and even when the soul protests quietly, buried beneath deadlines and distractions, they keep going. Because stopping feels scarier than continuing. Because silence means having to hear the truth. Because deep down, they're afraid that if they step off the road they've always walked, they won't know how to live. There was a time when everything around you felt alive, when colors seemed more vibrant, when your heart beat faster over little things, when the idea of tomorrow felt exciting, not heavy. But somewhere along the line, that feeling faded. Not all at once, slowly. The laughter became forced. The smiles became polite. The dreams became distant. And you learned how to move through your days without being fully present in them. You called it responsibility. You called it adulthood. But it was something else. It was forgetting. Forgetting what it felt like to be connected, not just to people, but to yourself. Forgetting how to sit with your feelings instead of managing them. Forgetting how to be still without needing to be productive. We're all taught how to keep moving. We're taught how to succeed, how to plan, how to build. But no one teaches us how to stop. No one teaches us how to sit in the discomfort of not knowing, how to let go of stories that don't fit anymore, how to fall apart gracefully. And so we hold on. We grip tightly to people, to identities, to routines, long after they've stopped serving us. Not because we love them, because we're afraid of what it means to be empty. But emptiness is not the enemy. Emptiness is space. Space for truth. Space for healing. Space for something new to grow. There was a man who had spent his life building a career, a reputation, a family. From the outside, it looked like he had everything, but inside, he felt like a stranger in his own skin. Every day felt like performance. He said the right things, did the right things, but none of it felt real. He couldn't remember the last time he cried, couldn't remember the last time he felt joy that wasn't tied to accomplishment. And then one evening, alone in his car, after a long day, he sat in silence. No music, no phone, just the sound of his own breath. And something inside him broke open. He didn't even understand why. He just cried. Not a tear or two. He wept. Years of silence pouring out of him in waves. And in that release, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Truth. That moment didn't fix everything, but it cracked the surface. It gave him permission to begin. He started waking up earlier, not to get more done, but to simply be. He sat with his coffee in silence. He took longer walks. He talked less and listened more. Not to others, but to himself. To the voice that had been drowned out for years by obligation. He began asking new questions. Not what should I do today, but how do I want to feel today? And though the answers didn't always come easily, they were honest, and honesty became his compass. There was also a woman who had spent her entire life being what others needed. The supportive daughter, the patient friend, the loyal partner. She gave endlessly, not because she was selfless, but because she didn't know how to ask for anything in return. Every time she had a need, she swallowed it. Every time she felt anger, she softened it. Every time she wanted more, she told herself to be grateful for what she had. Gratitude became a cage. One day, sitting across from a friend who was venting for the 10th time about the same issue, she realized she felt nothing. Not compassion, not frustration, just numb. And it scared her because she had always been the strong one, the one who could handle anything. But in that numbness, she saw the truth. She hadn't been handling anything. She'd just been avoiding everything. That night, she wrote herself a letter from the part of her she had silenced. And the words came like floodwaters. I'm tired. I'm angry. I want to be held. I want to matter, not because of what I give, but because of who I am. And when she finished, she felt lighter, not fixed, just seen by herself for the first time in years. And from that night forward, she made a vow, not to never give again, but to give from a place of fullness, not depletion. She started taking weekends off. She started saying no. She stopped apologizing for not being available. And though some people pushed back, the right ones didn't. They stayed, and they finally met the real her. This is what it means to return to yourself, to peel away the layers you've built for survival, to tell the truth, even when your voice trembles, to choose presence over perfection, to let yourself be soft in a world that glorifies hardness. And it's not easy. The world won't always understand. Some people will call you selfish. Others will say you've changed. But what they don't understand is that you're not becoming someone else. You're unbecoming everything you were never meant to be. Healing is not linear. Some days you'll feel strong. Other days, the weight of your past will pull at your ankles. You'll revisit old wounds. You'll hear the old voices in your head telling you you're not enough. But each time you'll return quicker. You'll remember your truth faster. And that, more than anything, is the sign that you're growing. Not that the pain is gone, but that it no longer owns you. You begin to create rituals that nourish your soul. Not routines built on productivity, but practices built on presence. You light candles, not to set a mood, but to create sacredness in the mundane. You take walks without your phone, letting your senses reawaken. You write, not to be read, but to release. You cry without rushing to wipe the tears. You laugh from your belly. You rest, not as a reward, but as a right. And slowly your life begins to feel like yours again. Let them say you've changed. Let them whisper. Let them go. You're not here to be understood by those still committed to their own numbness. You're here to live, fully, deeply, honestly. And that means shedding. That means grieving. That means letting your truth be louder than your fear. It means being willing to be misunderstood in order to be fully yourself. So breathe. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're on a sacred path back to your own heart. And every step you take, every tear you shed, every truth you speak is a homecoming. You reach a point where the patterns you once accepted start to sting. Not because they've changed, but because you have. What used to be tolerable suddenly feels unbearable. The roles you once stepped into with ease now feel suffocating. You look around and see how much of your life has been constructed on the need to be needed, the fear of disappointing others, and the belief that your worth is tied to how little space you take up. But now something in you has awakened, a flicker of rebellion, a whisper that says, there has to be more than this, and that whisper becomes louder each time you say yes when you mean no. Each time you hold back your truth just to keep the peace. Each time you choose someone else's comfort over your own. This awakening doesn't make you reckless, it makes you real. And realness has consequences. You start showing up differently. You speak with less apology and more clarity. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop asking for permission to be who you are. And that shift disrupts the dynamics you once depended on. People who were used to your compliance may call you difficult. People who were drawn to your caretaking may call you selfish. And you will feel it. The sting of being misunderstood, the ache of being distanced from those who once found you agreeable. But you will also feel something else, relief, a quiet relief that grows with every moment you honor yourself. There was a man who had always been agreeable. He knew how to keep things light. He knew how to avoid conflict, how to laugh at jokes that made him uncomfortable, how to blend into any room. He wore his likability like a shield, but inside he was screaming, not with rage, with loneliness, because no one really knew him, not fully. They knew the version of him that smiled, nodded, and went along with the flow. But the parts of him that were tender, complex, opinionated, those parts stayed hidden. Until one day, a close friend said to him, I feel like I don't really know you. And that truth, though spoken gently, shook him, because it was true. He had built a life of surface-level connection and had called it safety. But it wasn't safe. It was isolating. So he began to show up differently. At first, it was small, saying, I don't agree with that, in a conversation where he usually stayed silent. Then it was bigger, telling his partner how disconnected he felt, how much he missed being seen. And then, the hardest of all, being honest with himself, about the dreams he had abandoned, about the pain he had numbed, about the years he had spent pretending, and it was messy, it was awkward, it was unfamiliar, but it was honest. And in that honesty, something beautiful bloomed. Not instant joy, not immediate clarity, just connection, real connection, the kind that doesn't require a mask. There was a woman who had always been the strong one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need help. She was praised for her resilience, admired for her independence. But beneath the surface, she was tired, bone-deep tired, not from doing too much, but from holding it all alone. She didn't know how to ask for help without feeling like a burden. She didn't know how to fall apart without labeling herself as weak, so she kept going. Until one day she couldn't. Her body shut down, her spirit collapsed, and in that moment of forced stillness, she realized that strength isn't about how much you carry, it's about knowing when to set things down. So she started letting people in. She cried in front of her sister. She told her therapist the truth. She let her friends see her raw, unfiltered, and instead of being met with judgment, she was met with love. Not the performative kind, the real kind, the kind that doesn't flinch when you're messy, the kind that doesn't pull away when you're heavy. And in receiving that love, she found a strength she never knew existed, a strength rooted in softness, a strength that didn't need to prove itself. You begin to learn through these moments that wholeness isn't found in perfection. It's found in permission. The permission to be messy, to be inconsistent, to be both a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time. You stop waiting to be fully healed to live your life. You stop believing that you need to earn rest. You start choosing rest because you're tired, choosing silence because the noise is too much, choosing solitude because you're finally learning to enjoy your own company. And slowly life begins to feel different, not easier, just more aligned. You no longer feel the need to chase every opportunity. You no longer fear missing out because you understand that what's meant for you will not require you to betray yourself to have it. You trust the unfolding. You trust the pace. You trust the process, even when it's uncomfortable. You begin to see yourself differently too. You see the way your eyes soften when you speak your truth. You see the way your shoulders relax when you're around people who accept you. You see the way your body responds to honesty with peace, and that becomes your compass. Your intuition sharpens. You stop overriding it. You stop explaining it away. You begin to trust that your body, your spirit, your heart, they know. They always knew. You just needed to get quiet enough to listen. You start treating yourself the way you've always treated others, with care, with kindness, with understanding. You start becoming your own safe space, your own advocate, your own friend. And in doing so, you raise the standard, not just for how others treat you, but for how you treat yourself. You stop tolerating relationships that make you feel small. You stop entertaining dynamics that make you question your worth. You stop participating in your own abandonment, and you start choosing differently. Not from fear, from clarity. Let them call it a phase. Let them misunderstand your boundaries. Let them think you're being dramatic. You don't owe anyone a watered-down version of your truth. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your healing. This is your life, your soul, your sacred unfolding. And the people who are meant for you will not require you to dim your light to stay in their presence. They will rise with you, or they will fade away. And either way, you will be okay, because you are learning to be okay with yourself, to sit in your own presence without judgment, to hold your own hand through the darkness, to whisper to yourself, "I've got you," and mean it. That's the revolution. That's the return. That's the kind of healing that doesn't just change your life, it changes the world around you. There comes a time in life when your soul grows louder than your habits, when the rhythm of your routine begins to feel like a lullaby sung too many times, the same notes over and over until you forget what silence feels like. And in that silence, if you let it stretch wide enough, you begin to hear something else, a whisper, a truth, something that was always inside you, waiting for the noise to die down so it could speak. But most people don't like silence. They fear what might come up, so they fill their days with distraction, tasks, conversations, chores, notifications. They keep moving, thinking movement means life. But sometimes stillness is what brings you back to being alive. Stillness, though quiet, is the beginning of reckoning. And reckoning isn't about being right. It's about being real. It's about holding your own gaze in the mirror and asking, who have I become trying to be accepted? There was a man who always moved fast. He took pride in being efficient, in being productive. He didn't let himself slow down, because slowing down meant feeling. And feeling was messy. He grew up believing emotions were weaknesses, that success came from sacrifice. So he sacrificed his weekends, his sleep, his softness, and he built a life that looked solid. Money, recognition, status. But deep down it felt hollow. It was a fortress, not a home. He didn't know how to let people in. Not really. They saw the polished version, the one with answers and confidence. But no one knew how often he sat in his car before walking into the house, gathering the energy to pretend again. Until one morning, he couldn't get up. His body just wouldn't move. Not because he was ill, but because he was empty. He lay there listening to the rain tapping against the window, and for the first time in years, he let the silence stay. He didn't pick up his phone. He didn't check his email. He just stared at the ceiling and whispered to himself, I don't want to do this anymore. Not life. Just this version of it. This race, this mask, this endless performance. In the weeks that followed, he began to walk slowly. He watched the sunrise instead of scrolling through headlines. He cried watching an old movie and didn't apologize for it. He told a friend that he was struggling and the sky didn't fall. He didn't lose respect. In fact, it was the first real connection he had felt in years. And that's how it begins. Healing, with slowness, with honesty, with saying the thing you've never said out loud because you were afraid it would change everything. There was also a woman who had spent her entire life nurturing others. She was the one everyone called. She always picked up, always showed up. She could calm storms with her words, but no one ever asked how she was doing. Not because they didn't care, but because she never let them. Somewhere along the way, she learned that love meant giving everything, that being needed was the same as being wanted. So she gave and gave, until one day she realized she had nothing left for herself. It hit her while she was standing in line at the grocery store. Her child had spilled juice on the floor, and instead of reacting, she just froze. Not from anger, from fatigue, from depletion. Her limbs felt heavy, her breath felt shallow. She went through the motions, cleaned the spill, paid for the groceries, drove home. But that night, while putting the groceries away, she dropped a jar and watched it shatter on the kitchen floor. And for the first time, she let herself sit down next to the mess. Not clean it, not hide it, just sit and cry and breathe. She didn't tell anyone right away. It felt too raw, too confusing. But she began to listen to herself. She bought herself a journal and wrote every morning, even if it was only a few words. She took baths. She said no to the friend who always took and never gave. She made a playlist of songs that made her feel like she used to feel, before she became everything to everyone. And slowly, she began to come home, not to a place, to herself. That's the kind of return most people don't talk about, the one that happens quietly when no one's watching. It's not a social media post. It's not a glow-up. It's the slow and sacred work of learning to be with yourself again, of sitting in your own presence without shame, of saying, I miss you to your own heart. And with that return, you start to notice things. You notice how certain people make your body tense, how certain environments drain your energy, how certain words echo like old wounds. You begin to understand that not everything that's familiar is healthy, that just because you've always done something one way doesn't mean it serves you anymore. You begin to question everything, not from fear, but from awakening. And awakening is messy. You lose things. You lose people. You lose illusions. But what you gain is clarity, integrity, peace. You begin to show up differently in relationships. You don't respond out of obligation. You don't say yes just to keep someone else from feeling discomfort. You don't beg for connection that's rooted in performance. Instead, you start creating relationships that are mutual, where your needs matter, where your silence doesn't mean invisibility, where your truth is not too much. And those relationships, they feel like breath, like exhale, like rest. It won't be everyone, Some people will fade. Some will push back. Some will try to guilt you into returning to the version of you that made them more comfortable. But that version is gone. She served her purpose. She protected you. She survived. But now she is allowed to rest. Now you are allowed to be new. And the ones who are meant to walk with you in this new season, they won't need the old you to stay. You'll redefine what success means. It won't be about productivity. It won't be about how much you achieve or how many people approve of you. It will be about alignment. How well does your life match your truth? How well does your external world reflect your internal values? Are you at peace when you're alone? Do your days feel nourishing or depleting? Success, you realize, is not a number. It's a feeling. And peace is the new wealth. You'll start creating space for stillness, for play, for wonder. You'll remember what it feels like to laugh without self-consciousness, to rest without guilt, to love without fear. You'll stop chasing and start attracting. Not because you figured out some magical formula, but because you finally stopped abandoning yourself. And when you stop abandoning yourself, you stop accepting relationships, careers, and patterns that require you to disappear. You'll build a life where your soul can exhale, where you don't have to translate your truth into something digestible, where you don't have to wear your pain like armor, where you don't have to hide your joy so it doesn't make others uncomfortable. You'll wake up and feel at home, not just in your bed, but in your being. And that life, it's possible, not when everything's perfect, but when you choose to be present, when you choose to be honest, when you choose to meet yourself with compassion again and again and again, even on the days you forget, even on the days you fall back into old patterns, especially on those days. Because healing isn't about being flawless. It's about being faithful to your heart, to your path, to your becoming. So don't rush it, don't force it, let it unfold. Like petals in the sun, like waves meeting the shore, let it be sacred, let it be slow, let it be yours. There comes a point where the noise of the world fades and all you can hear is your own heartbeat. It doesn't happen in a rush. It doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It arrives slowly in the quiet moments, like when you're driving home and realize you've been on autopilot, or when you're laughing with friends and suddenly feel distant, disconnected, like you're watching life from behind a glass wall, or when you're lying in bed at night, wide awake, not because you're busy or stressed, but because something deep inside of you is stirring, something that refuses to be ignored anymore. It's not pain, not exactly. It's a kind of ache, a longing, a knowing that the life you're living is too small for the soul you carry. This is not a breakdown. It's a breaking open. It's your spirit whispering, there's more. Not more in the way society defines it. Not more money, more fame, more attention, more truth, more aliveness, more presence. The kind of more that doesn't show up on resumes or social media posts. The kind that makes your breath catch and your chest expand. The kind that makes you remember who you were before the world told you who to be. It can feel terrifying, this unraveling, because it calls everything into question. The relationships you've built, the identity you've created, the routines you've settled into. Suddenly, the things that once made sense no longer fit. Conversations feel hollow, roles feel restrictive, goals feel irrelevant, and you're left wondering, is it me? Yes and no. It's you evolving. And it's the life you've outgrown. You are not breaking down. You are breaking through. There was a woman who had spent her entire adult life striving. She was good at it. High achiever, people pleaser, the one who always came through. Her days were full, meetings, deadlines, obligations. Her calendar was color-coded, her goals were clear, but beneath the structure, she was crumbling. Her body ached, her smile was tired, and no one knew. Because she had learned how to make exhaustion look graceful. She thought she was managing. Until one afternoon in the middle of a meeting, she suddenly couldn't hear what anyone was saying. Their mouths moved, but her mind went quiet. Her heart began to race. Her breath grew shallow. She excused herself, locked herself in a bathroom stall and sobbed. She didn't know why. Nothing had gone wrong, but everything inside her said, I can't do this anymore. Not the job, not the pace, not the pretending. And that breakdown became her turning point. Not overnight, but gradually. She didn't quit everything. She didn't run away. She simply stopped ignoring herself. She started checking in, started taking afternoons off, started letting herself rest without earning it, and she discovered something revolutionary. Her worth didn't decrease when her productivity did. In fact, her presence increased. She became more grounded, more real, more her. There was also a man who had always been the provider, The Rock. He worked hard, said little, and carried the weight of generations on his shoulders. He never cried, not because he didn't feel, but because no one ever gave him permission to. Vulnerability wasn't modeled for him. Strength meant silence. So he learned to bury his feelings beneath logic, until his son, barely 6 years old, asked him, "Daddy, why don't you smile when you're happy?" And he didn't have an answer, because the truth was, he didn't remember the last time he felt happy without also feeling pressure. Pressure to hold it all together. Pressure to be enough. That night, he stood in front of the bathroom mirror and let the tears fall. Quietly, not because he was weak, but because he was ready. Ready to feel, ready to heal, ready to stop pretending that being stoic meant being strong. And from that moment on, he began showing up differently. He started journaling, started hugging longer, started saying, "I'm proud of you," not just to his son, but to himself. And his world didn't fall apart, it expanded. Because when you let go of the version of yourself that was built for survival, you make space for the version of yourself that's here to live. That kind of transformation isn't flashy. It doesn't always look like a new career or a big move. Sometimes it's in the subtleties. Choosing to breathe before reacting, choosing to walk away from drama, choosing to sit in silence instead of filling it with distractions, choosing to forgive yourself for the years you spent in survival mode. Because you did what you had to do. You loved the only way you knew how. You coped the only way you could. And now you get to choose differently. Not because you were wrong before, but because you're ready now. You begin to reclaim things you forgot you loved. Painting, singing, writing, gardening, sitting in the sun. You stop needing a reason to do them. You stop measuring their value in productivity. You do them because they make you feel alive. Because they reconnect you with a part of yourself that was never lost, just buried. You begin to treat your body as a friend, not a project. You listen when it whispers. You rest when it's tired. You eat when you're hungry. You move not to punish, but to celebrate. You realize that your body isn't the enemy. It's the vessel of your soul, and you begin to thank it for carrying you through years of silence, for being patient as you learned how to come home. You start redefining intimacy. It's no longer about grand gestures or perfect chemistry. It's about presence. It's about feeling safe enough to be seen in your entirety. It's about being able to say, "I'm not okay," and have someone respond, "I'm here." It's about knowing that you don't have to perform to be loved, that your messiness isn't a burden, it's an invitation. And that kind of love, it doesn't come often, but when it does, it feels like breath. You start building boundaries, not to shut people out, but to protect the sacred within you. You stop explaining your number. You stop over-apologizing for your needs. You understand that boundaries aren't walls, they're doorways. They teach others how to treat you, and more importantly, they teach you how to treat yourself. And then one day, you realize you've changed. Not in the way you expected, not in some dramatic before and after, but in the way you carry yourself, in the way you respond instead of react, in the way you allow joy without bracing for loss, in the way you hold space for others without abandoning yourself. You're not healed, you're healing, you're not done, you're becoming, and that in itself is a miracle. Because coming home to yourself after years of disconnection is holy work. It's not linear, it's not glamorous, but it's real, it's raw, it's sacred, and it's yours. No one else gets to define it. No one else gets to dictate your pace. This is your path, your heart, your truth. And every step you take is a step back to who you've always been beneath the noise. So keep going, keep breathing, keep listening, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Because the life you're creating isn't just a life that looks good on paper, it's a life that feels good in your soul. And that, beloved, is everything. There is a moment in everyone's life when they realize they can no longer outrun themselves. It doesn't come when you're surrounded by people or when you're checking things off your to-do list. It comes in the quiet, when the noise fades, when there's no one to impress, when the mirror doesn't lie, and the weight in your chest finally gets your attention. It comes when you realize that you've been moving so fast for so long, but you don't even remember what you were chasing. You just know that you're tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, but the kind that goes deeper, the kind that whispers, "You've been living for everyone but yourself." At first, this realization can be disorienting, because for so long you were sure you were doing the right thing. You followed the rules. You played the part. You wore the mask. You became who they needed, who they expected, who they praised. And maybe for a while, that was enough. But now something in you has shifted. The applause doesn't feel as satisfying. The validation doesn't land the same way. You smile, but it feels like a performance. You laugh, but it feels like background noise. And when you finally sit still, you realize how much of your life has been built around avoiding yourself. There was a man who had always been admired. He was the guy people turned to in a crisis. Calm, composed, charismatic. He had answers. He had plans. But when he was alone, he felt empty. Not because he lacked anything externally, but because he had never let himself be known. He was a master of creating distance. Even in close proximity, he could be in a room full of people and still feel completely alone, and he didn't know why. Until one evening, after another successful meeting, he sat in his car, staring at the steering wheel and whispered, "I don't want to be this person anymore." That whisper didn't come from defeat, it came from truth, from a place inside him that had been buried under decades of expectations. And from that moment, he began to unravel. He started therapy, not because something was wrong, but because he finally wanted to understand himself. He started journaling. At first, his words were stiff, mechanical, but over time they softened, became more honest, more raw. He admitted he was scared, that he didn't know who he was without the image, that he longed to be held, not physically but emotionally, and for the first time he let someone in. Not into the polished version, into the mess, into the questions, into the ache. And in doing so, he didn't lose his strength. He found it. There was also a woman who had perfected the art of self-sacrifice. She was loved for her generosity, her kindness, her ability to anticipate everyone's needs before they even asked. But she was dying inside. Not in a dramatic, visible way, but in a quiet, invisible one. She smiled, but her eyes were tired. She listened, but her own thoughts were screaming. She served, but her soul was starving. And one day she realized she hadn't done anything just for herself in years. Not one thing. Her life had become a series of tasks, a list of obligations, a script with no space for improvisation. So she stopped. Not everything, just one thing. She canceled dinner plans, turned off her phone, sat on the couch and cried. And in that hour of solitude, she didn't solve anything. She didn't fix anything, but she made a decision. From this point on, she would stop abandoning herself. It started with small acts, buying herself flowers, taking slow walks, saying no without explanation, saying yes without guilt, and with every choice, she felt lighter. Not because her responsibilities disappeared, but because she finally felt like she existed within them. Like she wasn't just a role, she was a person, and she mattered. These stories are not unique. They echo through the hearts of so many. People who are tired of being everything to everyone, who are ready to stop performing, who are craving a life that feels honest, that feels whole. And this kind of transformation, it doesn't look glamorous. It looks like crying in the shower. It looks like sitting in silence while your phone buzzes. It looks like disappointing people who benefited from your self-abandonment. But it also looks like breathing again, like smiling from a place of truth, like laughing and actually meaning it. It looks like choosing yourself, not because you're selfish, but because you're finally remembering that you're human. You start noticing things differently. You start feeling things you used to numb. You cry at sunsets. You pause when the wind brushes against your skin. You hear a song and it makes your chest ache in the best way. You start to feel life again, not just survive it, and it's overwhelming at first. Because when you've been disconnected for so long, reconnection can feel like fire. But it's a necessary burning. It clears out the numbness. It makes space for feeling. You begin to trust your instincts again. You stop second-guessing yourself. You realize that your body has always known what your mind tried to ignore. That tension in your shoulders, that wasn't random. That pit in your stomach, that was guidance. That sigh of relief when you're finally alone, that was truth. You begin to understand that you don't need someone else to validate your experience for it to be real. If it feels wrong to you, it's wrong for you. If it feels heavy, it's not aligned. And if it costs you your peace, it's too expensive. You stop seeking permission to rest. You stop feeling guilty for choosing solitude. You start protecting your energy like it's sacred, because it is. You say no without a novel of justification. You say yes only when it aligns. You let go of relationships that feel like labor. You create space for those that feel like home. And you stop trying to force people to understand you. Some won't, some can't. And that's okay, because you weren't meant to be digestible for everyone. You were meant to be authentic. And authenticity, it costs. It costs comfort, familiarity, approval. But what it gives you in return is priceless. It gives you freedom, clarity, alignment. It gives you yourself. And when you have yourself, you're never truly alone. You become your own safe space, your own sanctuary, your own truth teller. You begin to reimagine success. It's no longer about status. It's about soul, about waking up and feeling at peace, about going to sleep without resentment, about living a life that's true to your essence. You stop chasing and start attracting. Not because you learned some secret, but because you stop blocking yourself with doubt, with fear, with pretending. You learn that healing isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming present. It's not about having it all together. It's about letting yourself fall apart, knowing you can put yourself back together in a way that feels more honest. You stop fearing the mess. You start honoring it, because the mess is where the magic is. It's where the old breaks down and the new begins to form. And so you breathe. You slow down. You stop running. You come home. Not to a place, to a feeling, to a rhythm, to a knowing. The knowing that you are enough, as you are, in your joy, in your grief, in your doubt, in your faith, in your questions, in your answers. You are enough, not because you've done something extraordinary, but because you exist. And existence is a miracle. It's strange how you can go years without realizing that you've been slowly drifting away from yourself. Not because of one big moment, but because of all the small ones, the compromises, the silences, the way you chose peace over truth again and again, until peace started to feel like self-betrayal. You convince yourself it's okay, that it's temporary, that it's necessary, that one day you'll finally get back to yourself. But days become weeks. Weeks become months. And then one morning, you look in the mirror and can't quite recognize the reflection staring back at you. You know it's you, but something is missing. Not visibly, energetically. Your essence, your fire. That wild and unfiltered part of you that once spoke loudly and laughed freely and loved without apology. She's still there, but she's buried under layers of being palatable, polished, proper. And now the weight of those layers has become unbearable. It begins with a feeling, a restlessness you can't explain, a sadness that doesn't have a clear source. You're not unhappy exactly, but you're not fully alive either. You go through your day, doing what you're supposed to do. You smile, you show up, you function. But beneath it all, there's a soft voice whispering, there has to be more than this. And the more you try to ignore it, the louder it gets, until finally you stop. You sit, you listen, and what you hear shakes you. You hear the longing, the grief, the rage. You hear your own heart asking why you've been silencing it for so long, why you've allowed your worth to be defined by how easy you are to love, why you've tolerated spaces where you had to shrink to fit. And for the first time, you don't brush it off. You don't distract yourself. You let yourself feel, fully, completely, without apology. There was a woman who had always been loved for how low maintenance she was. She didn't ask for much, didn't make waves. She prided herself on being easy, but she didn't realize that in being easy, she was erasing herself. She didn't express her desires, didn't share her opinions, didn't voice her needs, and she thought that made her a good partner, a good friend, a good woman. But it made her invisible, even to herself. Until one day someone asked her, "What do you want?" And she couldn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because she'd never been asked in a way that made her believe her answer mattered. That night she sat on her bed, hands trembling, and wrote down every single thing she wanted. Some were small, quiet mornings, fresh flowers, more time in nature. Others were bigger, truthful conversations, passionate love, the courage to take up space. And when she looked at that list, she cried, because it reminded her of the woman she used to be, the woman she still was, beneath all the pleasing and pretending. And from that day on, she made a promise. She would never silence herself again for the comfort of others. There was a man who had built his identity around being strong, stoic, reliable. He was the rock, the protector, the one who never faltered. And it worked until it didn't. Until the weight of everyone else's needs became too much. Until the silence he kept inside started to scream. He didn't know how to ask for help, didn't know how to admit he was struggling. So he kept smiling, kept providing, kept pushing. Until one night, his body broke down before his will did. A panic attack, out of nowhere. Except it wasn't out of nowhere. It was years in the making. He didn't tell anyone right away. He was ashamed. Ashamed that he couldn't keep it all together. Ashamed that the strength he was so proud of had finally cracked. But slowly he began to talk. First with a therapist, then with a friend, then with himself. And with each conversation, the shame began to loosen. He began to see that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was release. It was realness. It was a path back to himself. And the more he allowed himself to feel, the more he began to heal. These stories are not rare. They are everywhere. People walking around, looking whole, feeling hollow. People who smile out of habit and stay silent out of fear. People who have forgotten that life is not meant to be endured. It's meant to be felt, fully, deeply, authentically. You begin to reclaim your voice, not in a dramatic way, in a sacred way. You start by speaking your truth in small moments. "I don't like that. That hurt me. I need some time." And even though your voice shakes, you don't silence it. You keep going, and it gets easier. It gets stronger. Until one day you realize you no longer whisper your boundaries, you declare them. You no longer ask for space, you take it. You no longer wait for permission, you give it to yourself. And it changes everything. The people who truly love you begin to love the real you. Not the version of you they projected. Not the version of you that always agreed. The real you, the you who has needs, who has emotions, who has opinions. And yes, some people walk away, but they're not leaving you. They're leaving the illusion that you upheld for their comfort, and their absence makes space for presence, for connection that doesn't require performance. You start redefining love. It's no longer about who stays the longest. It's about who shows up fully. It's about being seen without having to be perfect. It's about being held when you're not okay. It's about someone saying, you don't have to be anything other than who you are right now. And that kind of love, it's rare. But when it finds you, it feels like breath. You learn that solitude is not loneliness. It's intimacy with your own soul. You learn how to enjoy your own company, how to comfort yourself, how to entertain yourself, how to celebrate yourself. You stop waiting for others to give you what you can give yourself. And in doing so, you stop being afraid of being alone. Because you realize you were never alone. You just weren't connected. You become your own home, your own safe space, your own sanctuary. And from that place, you start creating, not for approval, but for expression. You dance, you sing, you write, you build, not to impress, but to release. And it's messy, and it's beautiful, and it's enough. You stop comparing your path to others. You understand that everyone is moving through their own journey, their own healing, their own process. And just because it doesn't look like yours doesn't make it wrong. You honor your pace, you trust your timing, you let go of the need to rush your becoming, and one day you wake up and you feel light. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer carrying what doesn't belong to you. You are no longer pretending. You are no longer performing. You are just being. And that being, that presence, is the most powerful thing you've ever known. You realize you don't have to do anything extraordinary to be worthy. You just have to be, fully, freely, fearlessly. And so you keep going. With tenderness, with courage, with truth, you keep choosing yourself, again and again and again, because you are no longer waiting to be saved. You are saving yourself. One breath, one truth, one moment at a time. There's a quiet power in choosing yourself, not in the loud, defiant way that demands attention, but in the subtle, sacred way that says, I am enough, just as I am. At first it feels unnatural, foreign, like putting on someone else's clothes. You're so used to adjusting yourself for others, shrinking, softening, smiling through discomfort, that authenticity feels unfamiliar. You wonder if you're being too much, too emotional, too distant, too honest, because for so long, you've been trained to measure your worth through other people's eyes. And when you stop looking outward for validation, everything inside you trembles. But that trembling, that's where the shift begins. It's the shaking of old patterns falling apart, the foundation of people-pleasing cracking beneath the weight of truth. You start to notice it in everyday choices, saying no without a list of reasons, leaving the party when your energy runs out, speaking your opinion even if your voice shakes, letting someone else be disappointed and not feeling the need to rescue them from that feeling. These small acts, they add up. They become a declaration, a quiet revolution, a return to yourself. There was a woman who always smiled, not because she was happy, but because it was expected. Her smile had become her armor, her way of keeping people at a distance while appearing warm and approachable. She knew how to diffuse tension, how to comfort others, how to nod along even when she disagreed. But inside she was screaming, not in anger, in longing. Longing to be real, longing to be seen beyond the smile, longing to feel without performance. One day in a meeting where she was being talked over for the third time, she didn't smile. She didn't nod. She didn't make herself small. She said calmly but firmly, "Please don't interrupt me." The room fell silent.